Hey everybody, I'm the Timmeister and welcome back to Rockport. In this video, I'm going to be totally reconfiguring the city's highway networks. Okay, so this is going to be a major infrastructure project, one of the biggest overhauls I have ever done, but it's necessary, and I think it's for the best. But before we begin anything, I just want to jump in some live play real quick and explain a couple of things. So there's a few things that bother me with the highway network, and they're all concentrated to the downtown area in this spot specifically. So this highway here and this highway here were part of this map already. And in one of the first episodes, I gone ahead and built this road here. So this highway is kind of like a little spur that leads into the downtown core. It leads into a tunnel that eventually ends right smack dab in the middle of the central business district. Now, my biggest problem with this little spur is the fact that it runs parallel to this highway over here. So it's a little bit redundant, because say if I was coming from this direction and I wanted to get to downtown, then really the easiest way to do that is to drive upstream from the river, cross the river, go through this big interchange, and then make our way downtown. So it leaves you with a lot of back travel. It's not very efficient, nor is it very realistic. There's not a whole lot of examples in the world where you'll find two parallel highways in such close proximity. It's just expensive and there's no reason for it. The other problem that I have is this interchange. So it looks cool. It's based off of a real interchange in Montreal, but I missed a very important detail. There's actually no way to turn left. So if I'm coming from downtown in this direction, there's no way for me to turn left and go down here. So that's just a lack of attention to detail on my end. But that's all going to change. I'm going to reconfigure all of this highway interchange, and we're going to make it better. So jumping back into time-lapse mode now, I'm going to start to move some things around. So the first thing, I want to save this interchange. So this interchange was built by Teddy Radko. It was part of this map, and I think it's a fantastic interchange. So what I'm simply going to do is use the Move It tool to plop it over by where I think the airport will be. And I really want to use this interchange for the entrance to the airport. So I'm going to delete this example here, and we're going to start to move some highways. Another reason why I really wanted to get into this project is, to my surprise, the city has a lot of resemblance to Auckland, despite me being like kind of on the fence about the whole Auckland thing. I think it you know, there's something there. Especially after building downtown, I was thinking to myself, you know what, the city is actually starting to resemble Auckland after all. And to continue on that theme, I've decided that I want to make the highway infrastructure similar to Auckland. Not exactly, you know, obviously with this map being not Auckland, but I want to make the highway infrastructure similar. So this section of highway could be my rendition of Highway 1 that sort of spans right through downtown. And my plan for this stretch of highway is to tap into the spur that leads into the central business district. So that stretch of highway will no longer be a little spur, but rather part of a main artery that leads to downtown. And this is going to be a much better system in my opinion, because it's going to give people direct access to downtown from both ends of the highway. So there will be no longer backtracking, and there's no longer going to be two parallel highways on either side of the river. It's going to clean up the city a little bit. Although you could argue that building a massive highway interchange right near downtown is not very clean, but you know, when you're building a realistic city, you always have to build some ugly infrastructure, you know, some 1960s urban renewal infrastructure. And this is a perfect example of that, you know, just a major highway just running right through an old historic neighborhood. It's fantastic. But this is going to be no easy task, because as you can see, I'm dealing with very, very tight constraints. I don't have a ton of room to build anything here. And I'm actually going to build a Y interchange a complete wide interchange. People will be able to go in any which direction they choose, because these tunnels here that lead into the central business district, I want them to be accessible from both directions. So it's going to make for a couple of tight turns, but like I said, you know, this is part of... I want this to pass as a realistic, older style interchange that was just kind of plowed through an old neighborhood at one point, maybe in the 60s or 70s. And right here is one of the tight turns that I was talking about. This is the best I could do with the space constraints that I have. But you'll see, by the end of this episode, I'm going to use a series of mods to smooth everything out, to make the slopes all nice and smooth. So I'll go over that as things come up. But yeah, I mean, this was a really exciting project, just because, like, it's in such a cool neighborhood. This neighborhood that the highway is going over is going to develop into a sort of like a historic neighborhood. So this is going to be a really interesting stretch of highway to drive along, because there's going to be lots of decently tall buildings on either side, and you know, it's going to look like the Gardiner Expressway in Toronto, kinda. There'll be no tall skyscrapers, but it'll be cool nonetheless. Another thing I wanted to do for this interchange is to make it accessible from multiple points in downtown. So here you see an on-ramp that leads onto the highway. So you'll notice here, I sort of created a diamond interchange. It's a very lopsided and weird diamond interchange, but if you look at it close enough, you'll see what I mean. And you also have these tunnels here that lead into the central business district. And I'm thinking on making some off and on ramps at multiple points in the tunnel. I'm not really sure where those are going to lead into yet, but we'll figure that out at some point. So there's going to be a vital connection to the entire city. But, you know, I don't want to focus only on road infrastructure. This episode, yes, that's all we're going to be doing. But I want the city to have a very functional public transportation system as well. But unfortunately, so one thing about this game is if you have too good of a public transportation network, your highways tend to not be as busy, and it kind of removes a bit of the realism. You know, just because your public transportation is super efficient, let's say, more people are going to choose public transportation over driving, and your highways are just going to be empty a lot of the time. So, you know, it's a little bit immersion breaking, but I totally get why that's a thing. But yeah, but I'm still gonna create a very robust and functional public transportation system. So as you can see, a ton of Move It is going on right now. Like, this is just such a tight interchange. It was pretty tough to build, but it's a lot of fun, you know, and I think it's going to function quite well. Like I said, I'm making it very accessible, plenty of off-ramps at different points in downtown, so I don't think it's going to clog up in one area too much. We'll have to see at the end of this episode how everything plays out. But yeah, I mean, it's definitely a project. along with a ton of use of the Move It tool. I'm also going to be using Node Controller a lot. I'm going to use the intersection marking tool a little later in this episode as well. So pretty much all of the major road network tools I will be using in this episode, and I'll link them down in the description if you want to download them. One thing that's really annoying, and hopefully this is not going to be as much of an issue in City Skylines 2, is by default in the base game of City Skylines 1, when you raise a bridge, it automatically snaps to 12 meters in height. And that's enough space to clear traffic lights and light poles and that sort of thing. But it's just at 12 meters, bridges are just so high, it's like way overkill. Like trucks just have so much room above their roofs. Not only that, it makes it harder to build off and on ramps because you have such a steep incline to get to 12 meters. So it's a little bit of a challenge, right? So what I tend to do is to set my bridges at around 8 meters in height because that's enough room for tall trucks to pass through. Unfortunately, light poles tend to poke through the road, and that's always a pain to deal with because then you got to move nodes around and, you know, maybe stretch out your lengths of road just so there's no lights that are spawning under a bridge. But it's a bit of a challenge. And hopefully, I'm very hopeful that's not going to be an issue in City Skylines 2. But I feel like that's sort of like a first world problem. You know, it's with all these mods, we're pushing the boundaries of City Skylines 1. It's crazy, you know, and I shouldn't be complaining about these little tiny things because City Skylines 1 is just such a great game with all the mods that are available for it, and you can create these super duper realistic cities. Maybe I shouldn't be complaining about such a little detail, but it's still a reality, right? So might as well talk about it. So here I am playing with the Node Controller once again, and basically what I like to do is to stretch out the intersections here. You're able to just create much more smooth merge lanes, and it just makes the highways look a lot cleaner and more realistic. You know, the intersecting on-ramps are just not so aggressive as they would be in the default game. And it's a super easy tool to use. Another big advantage is in City Skylines, every intersection needs to be flat by default, whether it's on a highway or even just like little streets and things. Sometimes you can create some very weird terrain, especially when you have an intersecting street on a very steep hill, because the intersection will be totally flat. What you can do with the Node Controller tool is actually allow intersections to be sloped. And that's very important when you're dealing with highways in very tight spaces, such as this, what I'm building right here, because then you can actually have slopes that continue to go down while you have maybe an off-ramp that's going up, and you know, things just fit better. It's kind of hard to explain, but hopefully you guys understand what I'm trying to say. So now I'm going to do something that I haven't really done before too much in City Skylines. I'm going to create some realistic looking retaining walls under some of these overpasses. And to do this, it's actually quite easy. So you'll need the Move It tool, and you'll need Anarchy as well, the mod. And this will allow me to place these seawalls underneath this bridge, and then using the Move It tool, I'm simply going to elevate them into place and to move them exactly where I need them. So not very hard to do, it's quick, easy, and it's a really simple way to make some interchanges look just a little bit more realistic. Now I realize I'm not applying lane mathematics to this interchange as I probably should, but I'm kind of constrained here in terms of space. So I can't really have like 4 lanes going in either direction and splitting off into multiple directions. So I'm a little bit limited on that front. But at the same time, I don't think this is going to be too much of a big problem. We'll see once the city really starts to develop and there's a ton of traffic coming through this interchange. We'll see just how well it's flowing in the future. But I think it's going to be just fine. Now, later in this episode, I will be building a much larger interchange. And this one, I'm going to try to apply proper lane mathematics just because it's going to be the most important interchange in the city. It's going to be the main intersection between 3 major highways, and I just know there's going to be a ton of traffic flowing through it. So for that one, I'm going to make an effort to apply proper lane management, and I'm going to have a lot more room to play around with too, so I can pretty much be at liberty to do whatever I want there. So skipping ahead now, you'll see that I've just replaced this wonderful T interchange just outside of downtown again. So I was kind of wondering what I should be doing as far as highways in this area, and I just thought that there should be a little bit of a bypass that avoids downtown altogether for traffic that just wants to drive through the city without going right through the core. So essentially I'm going to make a bypass that goes around the city through the suburbs rather than right through the middle of it. Anyways, I'll show more on that a little bit later. But now I want to focus on the big interchange near downtown Rockport. And this is totally going to be inspired by this huge interchange near downtown Auckland. This is the major interchange between Highway 1 and Highway 16. So I'm assuming this is probably one of the busier sections of road in the city. And like the big interchange in Auckland, this one as well is going to be 3 major highways that are intersecting into each other. So it's going to be this massive T or Y interchange. But it's also going to be a little bit more complicated than that because I'm going to intersect it with a large arterial road that's going to be passing through it. So that's going to add a layer of complexity to this. And you'll see it's not a small undertaking. This was like probably one of the more complex interchanges I've ever built. And it was no easy task. But thankfully, with the amount of mods and tools that we have to our disposal now, it makes building these interchanges a little bit more easier. Now, fair warning, for the first half of this build, it's going to look like a jumbled mess that doesn't make any sense. And it actually was in my mind for a little bit. I had to sit and just stare at this interchange multiple times to figure out, okay, what's the next step? What's the next link that I have to hook up, and try to figure out and make sense of the interchange. So forgive me for that if it looks like a jumbled mess, but I assure you that it looks pretty cool by the end of this. I'm pretty proud of this. It looks just like the one in Auckland, or pretty similar to it, and it's hopefully going to function fairly well. And like I was mentioning a bit earlier, I'm going to try as hard as possible to apply proper lane mathematics because I want this interchange to function as best as possible. And as you can tell already, this interchange has quite a few layers to it. It's looking like a true spaghetti junction. We're already 3 stacks high, and it has a very unconventional shape. But I really like these kind of interchanges in real life too, just because of their unconventionalness. You have your standard interchanges like your cloverleafs and your trumpet interchanges. They're fairly symmetrical and mostly easy to create. But these lopsided and asymmetrical interchanges I find are really, really cool. And they're harder to build in the game. They're harder to manage. But, if you can get them right, they just look fantastic. And as you can see here, I'm trying to make this interchange as accessible as possible. So as I said in the beginning, it's going to intersect with this main arterial road. And I'm trying to make it so if you're on the arterial road, you can pretty much split off into any direction. Okay, so that's going to add a few overpasses and on-ramps. It's going to look a little bit of a jumbled mess here for a bit longer, but I assure you, it'll make perfect sense by the end of this episode. You'll also notice that a lot of these bridges are clipping into each other. There's clearly not enough room for a car to fit underneath. And this is just temporary. I like to get the main layout of the interchange finished before then playing with the elevation of each bridge. So then I can go ahead and make sure there's enough room under each overpass and get all that done. But it's just much easier to lay down the roads first and then deal with the height. There's a relatively new mod that exists on the workshop, and that's called the Network Multi-Tool. And using that mod, it makes it really, really easy to create these kind of interchanges here. So it helps with creating very smooth slopes. You can connect two segments, making like these really smooth and nice curves. I've used it a couple of times in the beginning of this series, and I really enjoy it. But for me, the fun in City Skylines comes from building these interchanges manually. I don't know, there's just something about just using Move It and just building the whole thing manually, and then, you know, using Move It to adjust all the heights and the slopes and everything. For me, that's really where the fun comes into City Skylines. So there's nothing wrong with that mod at all. It's really, really a great tool, and I've used it a couple of times. I probably should have used it a couple of times in this interchange too, to avoid some frustrating periods of this, but yeah, for me, that's really where the fun comes in this game, is just the manual creation of these kind of things. Alright, and so now's the time to start detailing this entire build. And to do that, I'm going to start by using the intersection marking tool to mark down all of the merge lanes and all of the little intersections within this interchange. And this is a very essential tool if you want to create realistic looking interchanges, just because you can avoid all of these blank big chunks of pavement, which would be potentially dangerous in real life because you don't have any lines to indicate where you're supposed to go. Not that the traffic in City Skylines follows it anyway, but yeah, it just helps to make it look way more realistic. And it's actually a really easy tool to use. The learning curve isn't too bad unless you start getting into some more complicated interchange with like some fillers and things like that. But in this case, I'm just going to keep with like the simplest options of this tool, just to create smooth merges and those kind of things. So at this point, I just need to create this last merge point here into this 4-lane stretch of road. This is a little complicated because I have 3 different parts of the interchange that are intersecting into one. So I had to like merge these 2 1-lanes into a 2-lane, and then 2 2-lanes into a 4-lane. So there's like 2 sections to this specific part of the interchange. So it gets a little complicated, but I think I'm able to fit everything nicely together. And of course, using the node controller, you can just smooth everything out so you don't have those weird like lane switches that tend to be an issue in the vanilla base game. And this is one of the features that I'm most excited about for City Skylines 2, is we're finally moving away from a node-based road system to a lane-based road system. So in City Skylines 2, essentially, you're able to select where individual lanes go in any sort of interchange. So you're not like merging different roads onto one node. You can actually choose where all the individual lanes go. So that's like the most exciting thing about City Skylines 2, in my opinion. So I can't wait to see what kind of interchanges we'll be able to create in that game. Also, just by looking at some of the gameplay, it appears that by default, you'll be able to create much more intricate and tight interchanges, just because the nodes seem to be not so snappy as in City Skylines 1. For example, like when you're trying to create a really like congested interchange like this one, I often have to turn off node snapping, just because if I got too close, if I got like one section of road too close to another, they would just snap together, and it was awful to work with. So this is where some of the mods come in to fix that problem, but it doesn't look like it's going to be a problem at all in the vanilla game of City Skylines 2, but we'll see. I haven't actually played the game. Well, that's a lie. I got the opportunity to play City Skylines 2 about like 2 years ago, when it was in a very early alpha stage, and at that point in time, I'm not sure if all the features that we're seeing now were in the game at that point. I don't remember. Plus, I didn't sink in a ton of hours into the game when I had the chance. I don't even think I unlocked highways, because none of the feature highlights that we're seeing today seem familiar to me. I think I remember maybe logging like 5 to 10 hours in City Skylines 2 like 2 years ago. Again, it was in a very, very alpha stage. I'm sure a lot of the features were not existent, but I really only scratched the surface of that game. But anyways, what I'm talking about in this episode is based off of footage that I've seen for City Skylines 2. Pretty much the same footage that's available already on YouTube. Alright, well, this is the point in the episode that I am dedicating to detailing. So I'm going to be detailing both interchanges that we've built today. Well, technically we built 3, but one of them I just plopped down, so I'm not going to count it. But as far as detailing, it's going to be the huge, just plopping down some shrubbery and some trees between these overpasses. Like I normally say, it goes a long way just to add greenery in between these spaces. You don't need a ton of detail. Just with these shrubs and stuff, you can do amazing things with the simplest of props. But yeah, as far as detailing goes, beyond that, I'm only going to be focusing on these 2 interchanges, but there's going to be a ton more detailing that goes on between them. So eventually, once I start to develop the city more, and you know, we start to like build stuff around that stretch of highway, I'll detail it at that point, but I just want to focus on these 2 interchanges for now. So with that being said, this is going to be a major part of the city that is complete, one that I've been wanting to get into for the last little while. So that leaves us with the question, what are we going to get into in the next episode? I'm not really sure, but I would like to continue to expand on downtown. Maybe I'll get into filling in all of the empty spaces between the high rises that we placed last episode. That would be pretty cool. But, you know, I haven't really planned that far ahead. I tend to not plan too far ahead when I make these videos. I pretty much go by whatever I feel like doing when I launch the game. So it's kind of informal. I don't really have like a true schedule. But yeah, I just think it's more fun that way. You know, I still want City Skylines to be fun. I don't want it to be a job or a chore. So yeah, guys, I really hope you enjoyed this episode. I'm sure that there's more infrastructure projects to come in the near future. I'm getting a ton of suggestions from you guys on what you would like to see me build, and a lot of them are already in the plan to be included in the city. One of which is an airport. So I forget if I alluded on this early in this episode, but where I plopped the Y interchange that I really liked in the beginning of this episode, that is where the airport's going to go. I've concluded that it's probably the only place within this entire map that could fit an airport. So for those of you who were requesting an airport, stay tuned, because there will eventually be one over in that area. Other than that, there's like a ton of other things I want to add to the city, one of which is a giant stadium. So anyways, there's still a ton to come. I'm kind of worried at this point because City Skylines 2's release date is fast approaching, and I'm worried that the city is not going to be anywhere near completion before then. I'd like the city to be in a good, almost finished state by the time City Skylines 2 comes out, because then it'll be like a proper send-off, right? Like the final big city, the final huge project that is as complete as it can ever be. But right now we're sort of far away from that, so I gotta get going, because at this point, at the point of making this video, the release of City Skylines 2 is 4 months away, I think. And in City Skylines terms, that's not a long time, because some cities, I know a lot of creators have worked over like literally years onto one save game. So, you know, it's not uncommon to see those kind of that kind of dedication go into one city. I guess the last thing I want to do before ending this episode is to connect up this stretch of highway to the existing stretch of highway that goes to the edge of the map. So, you know, of course we want traffic to be able to make its way to the city. So yeah, that's going to be the last thing for this episode. However, stay tuned for the very end, because I'm going to include some awesome cinematics as I normally do. But I'm also going to get into some live play and just briefly go over what we've built this episode, just so you can get a good glimpse of what this whole infrastructure project looks like on a high level view. Alright guys, so here we are in the live play, and this is the brand new highway loop that we've created. I think it should do its job fairly well, because it now gives drivers the choice between going right through the middle of downtown, basically, or bypassing the city altogether by going through the suburbs that you see right here. So no matter which corner of the map you're coming from and going to, you should be able to get to your destination fairly well. So first impression after pressing play, traffic seems to be moving pretty smoothly through these sections of highway, either going through the suburbs here, through this tunnel. I built this giant Y interchange here that goes to the desert part of the map near the edge. This is kind of temporary. It's subject to change, as is like a lot of the highways that are going through the suburbs. I kind of just like quickly placed them. I didn't want to focus too much time on those. But anyways, looking at the traffic flow between these interchanges, it seems to be functioning really well. I actually ended up using a bit of the traffic manager mod just to avoid drivers from like switching between 10 lanes to not miss their exit, as you guys are totally familiar with, I'm sure. But other than that, I mean, everything is as you saw me build in this episode. So overall, things are functioning pretty well. We'll see how this scales as the population of the city increases. But overall, so far, so good. So that's going to be it for me in this episode. Again, I really hope you enjoyed it. If you did, I encourage you to drop a like, drop a comment, subscribe to the channel. There is plenty more content coming for Rockport before the release of City Skylines 2. But until then, guys, thank you so much for watching again, and take care.